This is Ekman Fine Art Project Lesson Hummingbird. Project lessons are for learning acid-free cast paper sculpture using the Ekman method. To order, go to ekmanfineart.com. My wife Patty Ekman has been creating wonderful hummingbird pieces of art for over 3 decades now. Here are some of her creations: tabletop pieces, wall hangings, as well as pedestal pieces. Humming in the Bluebells is one of her most popular pieces. Patty wants to show you how to create a hummingbird with this kit. You have the paper, bonding agent, a wire, and hummingbird casts.
This is the exact hummingbird I created for the step-by-step instructional video using our kit.
The first thing you'll want to do is mix your bonding agent. Add a 1/4 cup of water to a pot on the stove. When it comes to a boil, then add the powder that's in the package from the kit. You'll mix this thoroughly in the water. Here Patty's using a whisk. You could use a spoon or whatever you want. Just mix it up real good. It'll turn milky. Then you'll want to add some ice. The ice serves to cool the bonding agent. As it cools, it gets thicker. Have 2 containers ready. Add this thick bonding agent to one of the containers. After you've added the thick to one container, pour half of that thick bonding agent into the second container. Now you'll want to add water and mix thoroughly. Once you've got that thinned a little bit, you might want to add a little more water. The more water you add, the thinner it gets. Remember though, you can always make your bonding agent thinner, but the only way you can make it thicker is to add more of your thick.
Let's get started by cutting apart our 4 casts of the hummingbird, the 2 halves of the body and the 2 shoulder parts. I like to use 2 different kinds of scissors, the Fiskars for cutting apart the body, and then the trim work I use a little curved fingernail scissors that's very sharp, and it can do a lot of detail work. Now you see I'm trimming the shoulder piece of the hummingbird, and I use my little fingernail scissors to put a scalloped edge to pronounce the secondary wing feathers, which I attach the primary wing feathers to. Now I'm trimming out the other half of the body, and I want you to notice that we save all of our scrap pieces of paper because we can repulp them using water and a blender, and you can use them for different things like a ground or maybe grass or something under the bird. Next, we're going to attach each side of the body together with our bonding agent. We kind of fit everything together, and then I use my brush and my bonding agent, and I brush each side. It's kind of thick. I let the bonding agent soak in a little bit, and then I fit each half together, and I work it with my fingers to make sure that the seam is smooth on the outside. Get enough bonding agent on there. I fit them together. Sometimes I have to push the head together and the tail because just because of the way they dry, and you want them to fit solidly together. Now I'm tearing off a piece of chasing paper. This is the chasing paper that we've given you in the kit, and I'm going to wet this and put it along that seam. The chasing paper we've given you is that number 2 sheet in case you need to reorder it for further use. I wet it usually on both sides. It doesn't need to be, but it's easier to work in if you wet it on both sides. And then you apply it to the seam of the bird. Now I'm smoothing the paper on the seam of the bird with my fingers, and I want to make sure that you have clean fingers when you're working with the paper. It's always important. Our paper is acid free, and it's important that we keep it that way. I'm using another little chasing sheet to smooth the other under part of the bird, and you can work it in with your brush with the bonding agent and smooth it with your fingers again. And then after that, I usually take my chasing tool and I work in detail of that seam so you can't tell that the seam is there. This is the tuck tool burnisher that I'm using. It's on our website under tools, and you can purchase this. It's a very important tool that we use on everything that we do. It gives us the detail in the paper, and it smooths the surface. You just work in the detail of the feathers, and then we put it under a fan to dry it. Here I'm working in the detail with my chasing tool. You just want to make sure that it looks natural and you can't tell that there's a seam there. And you need to look at the cast because the feathers on the head of the bird are different than the feathers on the body. So you just want to match what I've done there. Okay, I'm going to finish up on this and lay it down, and then I'm going to work on the eye of the bird. I tore off a little section of the number 2 chasing paper, and I wet it with the bonding agent and roll it in a ball. And I'm going to let that dry and eventually cut that in half so I can put it on each side of the head of the bird. You'll see where that eye goes because we already have sculpted in the cast where the eye goes, but we want it more pronounced. I'm going to let that dry for a while, and then I'm going to work on the secondary wing feathers. It's like a little triangle, and I'm going to cut in maybe just a little bit to make it look like a feather on the side, both sides that are in the triangle shape. The one side I leave uncut. It's the thicker side, but that's the side it's going to be attached to the bird. Now I'm finishing cutting this side, and then I'm going to cut the other triangle on 2 sides. And as soon as I'm done with the cuts, what I'm going to do is take the wing formation and fold it in half so that the feathered sides match. I want to make sure that when you fold it in half, that the feathered side, the detailed feathered side, is on the outside. That's the cast side. It's on the outside of the fold. Now we'll do the primary wing feathers. This is a sheet of the thin hard paper, and you notice I have a long sheet of paper, but we include a shorter version of this paper in the kit because it's just easier to manage. So I'm cutting a strip a little bit less than 1/4 of an inch, and I cut 3 strips at least in this long paper. So you're just going to take your paper and cut probably six or 7 strips the same thickness. The next thing we're going to do is cut a thin strip of paper for each thick strip, which is going to be the spine of the feathers. And just make sure that you cut them as thin as you possibly can. They're just no bigger than like a hair. And go slow because it's easier to keep a whole strip of paper that way, and you don't cut off too much at a time. Go slow and keep it consistent. Cut as many of the spine strips as you have the feather strips. You're also going to use these for the tail feathers. Okay, I'm done cutting everything. Next thing I'm going to do is take the thicker feather strip, lay it on my surface, and I'm going to paint my bonding agent on the top of that. It secures your feather paper down so that you can add your spine paper right to the middle of that feather paper. And you'll want to keep that feather paper as straight as possible. Now you see what I'm doing here is I'm taking that spine paper and I'm placing it on the wet feather paper a little bit at a time with just a little pressure from my finger. And it keeps it right in the middle and it doesn't break. And if it does, you can just glue it right back on there. But you can keep a straight line. It needs to be right in the middle because that's how we're going to keep the feathers consistent. Then you're going to add one more application of the bonding agent right on top to keep that spine in place, and you don't want to disturb it. Repeat that last step on all of your feather strips. Then you're going to take your tuck tool burnisher and gently pry that strip up off the surface. Take them all and dry them thoroughly. While these are drying, we're going to make our beak. Take your wire and cut off about a 2-inch portion of the wire for the beak. It doesn't really matter if it's 2 inches or 2.5 inches. But what I want to do is roll some of the number 2 paper. First, tear it in a triangle about the size you want your beak. The size of my beak is about 1.25 inches long, and the width at the widest part is about 3/4 of an inch. You're going to take your triangle and put it on the surface, and the idea is to wrap that around the wire. So now we're going to wet our triangle, and I accidentally tucked a little bit of that in the wrong way, so I take my burnisher and I bring that end out. We give you more paper than you need, so in case you ruin your piece of paper doing this practicing, then you have another one. You can have another chance at it, or several more if you need them. And then we're going to take one end and wrap it around the wire. Tuck it in with your burnisher, and then you're going to roll it with your fingers. So we're gently tucking that paper over the wire right now, and then you're going to roll it with your fingers and make sure you don't tear the paper. So just keep keep rolling. And then I dry the surface off so that you don't catch the rest of the paper on there. But you keep rolling until it's smooth on the surface. It takes a little bit of practice. I've done about 500 of these things, maybe more. And you get good at it after a while. So maybe you need a couple of practice runs at it, but you can eventually get it. And after it's dry, then you can take your burnisher and burnish the outside of it to be a smooth beak. Next, we're going to cut the dry feather paper. Okay, take one of your feather strips, and what we want to do is make small cuts. Use your small fingernail scissors, and we're going to cut up toward the spine on each side. Look at this life-size eagle feather that we have cut, and notice how we have cut up toward the spine on each side. You won't be cutting this thin on each side, but this is what we want you to do. Be careful not to cut through the spine, but notice the V shape that we want when you're finished with cutting your feather. Just be careful, cut slow, cut up one side and up the other side, and don't worry about it if you make a mistake. You have plenty of paper to do it over again. All the feathers are different lengths, so if you cut through the spine and it's a small length, then save it. You can use it for a small tail feather or a small wing feather. Now I'm moving down the other side of the spine. Just have fun. It's a learning process. After you have all the strips cut, we're going to cut all the different feather length strips. Now here I'm rounding off the tips of my feathers and cutting the tail feathers first. I usually cut about 9 tail feathers, 1 for the middle and 4 for each side. And the lengths are about 5/8 of an inch on the short side to about 3/4 of an inch, maybe an inch on the long tail feather. And basically how I round them off is I cut a V in the opposite direction on the end of that tail feather, just to make them look like a tail feather end. And then I cut the wing feathers, and I usually do 10 feathers on each wing. The lengths are about 1 3/4 inches on the long tail or on the long wing feather, and then they go down to 5/8 of an inch on the shortest feather. Here you can see I've got the wing feathers and the tail feathers laid out. I want you to take your shoulder pieces, and it doesn't matter which shoulder piece goes with the left wing or the right wing. They're both the same, folded in half. And unfold them and take your bonding agent and put some bonding agent in the middle and start with that point. Lay in the longest wing feather to the right side of the fold. Lay it in there with the spine side up, and then take your tweezers, and I usually dip the end of the feather in a loaded brush with the bonding agent on it, just to give it a little more sticky. And then I take the feathers, long one first and then shorter, just like a feather wing would be, progressively getting from long to short. on the primary wing feathers. Just make it look like a hummingbird wing, and then you're going to fold that shoulder piece over, and so the feathers are sandwiched in there. You can make adjustments as you go. Just make it look like a hummingbird wing, a bird wing. I'm still adjusting my bird wing here. And it takes practice getting everything right, but you want to end up with a shape like I'm doing right here. Okay, I'm painting that opposite side of the shoulder with more bonding agent so it just has a good stick to it. It's easy to bend, and I'm taking my tweezers and working everything the way I want it. Just make it look like a shape that you want for the bird wing. And then I take my tweezers and my fingers and pinch it closed so that it won't reopen when I'm drawing it. But I would suggest getting a pair of tweezers that are pointed on one end. The bent ones really help too. Now we're going to do the flip opposite side. Take your shoulder, your other shoulder, and we're going to make the other wing, which is the opposite. Remember to go on the left hand side, bottom of the fold. Start with the fold, left hand side, and work your way down from largest feather to smallest feather, just like you did on the other side, only it's just a flip side of that. And then when you're all finished with this opposite wing, you fold it just like you did the other one, pinch it closed, and lay them aside to dry. Now you see here I've made a little cradle out of clay so I could put my bird body in there, and it will stay while I am adding the tail feathers. I take my bonding agent and I paint a little bit on the tail part of the bird. And then I'm going to do the same thing with my tail feathers. I'm going to dip the tail feathers in a little more bonding agent and apply them to the top side of the bird with the shortest ones on each side. Then I'm going to overlap them till I reach the center feather, and that is overlapped on the center, both sides. It's kind of a V shape on the tail. It has the longest tail feather in the middle. Now you can look at pictures of hummingbirds. They have their tail feathers shaped in different ways. Some of them are straight out and the others are fanned out. So just find a shape that you want for your hummingbird and put it on the tail of your bird. You can study the wings on pictures of different hummingbirds. They're all different. Some are up, some are down, some are next to the body. Just make your wings the way you want, and make your tail feathers the way you want. That's the good part about our medium. You can do what you want with it. Next thing I'm going to do here is take my little awl and right at the point of the bird's head where the beak would go, make a little hole, and then I take my dry beak. I want to burnish it down a little bit more, make sure that it's smooth on all sides. And then I'm going to add bonding agent, usually to the bird's head, and then to the end of the beak that you're going to fasten on to the bird's head, right at that point. Here I'm shaping the beak just a little bit more, getting it all the way I want. And I have that wire that goes in the bird. I'm cutting off the end of it here. It's probably a little bit too raggy on the end, but painting that with my bonding agent, and I'm going to put that right in the bird, in the hole there. And I take my hands and press it in there. And be careful not to disturb the tail feathers, because at this point they're probably still wet. Okay, that end of that beak is strong because it's got a wire in it, and I just wanted to show you that if you want to put the end of that beak in a flower, which the hummingbirds love to drink from, you can put some bonding agent on the end of the beak and put it in a flower. And it will stay there because of the strength of the wire in the beak. When I put the beak in, I always tear off a little piece of the chasing paper, #2 paper, just a little end of it, so that I can wrap that around the beak. This will form the hinge between the beak and the head, and you can take your chasing tool and burnish it down and create the detail that you want on that head, between the head and the beak. I usually try to kind of feather it in there and put the feathered detail on the head, and so you can't tell where the beak ends and the head starts. I add just a tiny little bit of feather detail on that nose of the bird. They always have little tiny feathers if you look at a picture of a hummingbird. Okay, now we're going to put the eyes in, and I take that little round piece of paper that we did for the eyes, and I take my tweezers and my #11 razor blade and cut it in half. Needs to be something sharp. And sometimes they can be a little bit distorted, so I just want to make sure that they're round. And you already have a placement where your eyes go. You can see that in the cast. But what we're just going to do is make it look a little rounder. So I take my awl and kind of pick it up with that, put some bonding agent on there, and I kind of form it on each side of the head to make it look rounder, so the eyes kind of stick out. It's easy to find the placement on the head of the bird, but what we want to make them do is make them a little more pronounced. We have the eyeball in the cast, so we make it easy for you to make the placement. Now I take it in and get everything dry. The tail feathers, the head, the beak, and the wings. Under a fan. Now, we're all dry. Now we're going to put the wings on, and we're going to chase the tail feathers so that there's no seam where the tail feathers fit on the body. And first I tear off a few strips, probably 3 for the tail feathers and 2 for the wings of the chasing paper. Here I'm taking the chasing paper. I'm going to fit the chasing paper over the seam where the tail feathers fit on the body. Just add a little bit of the bonding agent to the tail feathers where they join the body, and then I put that chasing paper right over that, and then I can work it in with my fingernails and my chasing tool and make it seamless. Add the detail that you want so that it doesn't have a seam. And you just work it in with your fingers, and then you work the detail of the body feathers going right down into the tail feathers. You don't have any seam or ridge there. It looks natural. Here I'm working the detail of the feathers, the body feathers down into the tail feathers. And I'm working on the underside of the bird. He's got a couple of little feet in there, and I sometimes add a little more chasing paper on his little feet so you can take and work them into how his feet look when he's flying. The feet are usually tucked up in his feathers. There's a little kind of indentation where his feet are, and then you make them tucked up in his feathers. The next thing we're going to do is attach the wing feathers to the bird, the body of the bird. And I have a little shoulder area on the body of the bird where the wings attach. Make sure the spines are up on the side of the bird that you're going to attach. And I take dressmaker pins and I pin it into a little area of the wing, and I attach it right where that shoulder area is on the bird's body. And you can place these wings up or down or straight out, however you want. Just find a picture of a bird and that you want to copy, and just place the wings how you want them on the bird. Okay, I'm pinning the wings on, and then you can make adjustments. Here I'm putting one wing on, and I have to adjust it because I think one wing was not as high as the other one, so I take it out and put it back in again. It's just make sure you have your wings on there symmetrically, and then we're going to chase them on the bird. So we take our chasing paper. I tear off about 4 strips, 2 strips for each wing. And then I'm going to add my bonding agent to the strips, and I work it around the seam of the wing to the body. It helps if you have that tweezers to do your delicate work with. So I just kind of work it in there and work it over the shoulder so that both sides are down on the body, or attached to the body. And leave the pin in when it dries, and then you can pull the pin out later. So I'm working it in with my tweezers, adjusting the wing. It's going to be wet right there, but not too wet. And see, I set the bird down in the little cradle, which is always helpful to have. And I'm doing the other wing. Wrap it around the top edge of that shoulder of the bird, and then work it in there. And you can take your chasing tool after you have it on there, the pieces on there, and then you chase in little feathers so that you can hide the seam again. Now this cradle is very helpful to hold the bird when you want to work on it, and it's made out of plastilina clay. It's harmless to the paper, and it won't put any color on the white paper, and it's just easy to work with because you can shape it with a tool and make a little indentation on it so it fits your bird perfectly. This is my second application of the chasing paper to the bird around the wing, making sure that it's strong in the place that it attaches. You work it in with the bonding agent, and then you take your tuck tool burnisher and work in the details around each wing. making sure that it's seamless. I'm making some last minute adjustments here around the shoulder of the bird on the underside. And we're going to dry them this way. Make sure that you have those wings symmetrical and that it looks the way you want it to look before it dries. And this is what I'm doing here. I'm making sure that the wings are just how I want them and the tail feathers and everything. This is the last wet on wet chasing that we're going to do on the bird. So make sure that it's the way you want it before it dries. So here I'm taking the bird and we're going to take it in and dry it. If you dry it under a fan, it will dry quickly. You could leave it overnight if you don't have a fan, but we always dry our things under a fan. So now we've got the bird that's all the way dry on the wings and the tail and the beak, and we can handle it, and it's quite strong. Next thing I'm going to do is remove the pins from each side, and then I take my burnisher and chase those pinholes out. You can make sure that you can't see where the pinholes were with your chasing tool. And I just add a few details here and there and make sure that everything is the way I want it for the final bird. This dry burnishing and detailing is the last thing you're going to do, and then you have your finished bird. I'm looking at all sides and it's all finished the way I want it. It's a beautiful hummingbird.
Yes, it is. Thank you, Patty. And here are the stills of that bird again. See all the detail in there. Now we're going to show you how to order. Go to ekmanfineart.com. You want to go to Learn Ekman Method. Click there, and there you're going to see Learning the Ekman Method. These are pictures that represent different categories. Click here under the Daisy Kit. There are the different project lessons. There's the Hummingbird Kit and the Hummingbird Cast, and you can click on those and order. You probably have enough paper to do 2 or 3 hummingbirds if you order a couple more casts. And you can check out other Patty's Flowers project lessons. There's the Daisy Kit, and you can put your hummers in there. And we also have the Rose Kit, and you can put your hummers in there too. Look for other Patty's Flowers kits. They are a great companion for your hummingbirds. So enjoy!